The arena stood like a giant stone bowl under the burning alien sun. Thousands of voices shouted from the high seats, their cries echoing off the walls. They came to see a human die. At the center of the arena floor, a man stood alone. His clothes were dusty, his arms bare, and in his hand he held only a short blade that looked too small against the huge battlefield. He raised his eyes toward the queen's balcony, where the alien queen sat like a goddess of war, her crown shining with jewels, her eyes sharp as knives. She lifted her hand and the crowd went silent, her voice carried across the arena, loud and cruel. This human thinks himself strong. He dares walk on our soil without bowing. Today he will be broken. Today he will learn shame. Her words rolled like thunder, and the audience screamed with laughter and cheers. The human did not reply. His jaw was set, his eyes steady. He looked up only once, locking eyes with the queen, and in that brief moment, his calmness seemed more dangerous than any weapon. The queen noticed, and her lips curled into a mocking smile, raised her hand again and called, "Bring in my champion!" The massive iron gate at the far end of the arena groaned as it opened. Dust blew into the air. Heavy footsteps followed. From the shadows stepped a towering warrior, his body covered in black armor, his four arms gripping weapons that glowed with alien energy. His head was crowned with horns, his mouth lined with fangs. The ground shook when he walked, and the crowd erupted with joy. "This is General Kor," the queen declared. "He has never lost a fight. Human, kneel now, and perhaps I will allow you to crawl away." The human's voice was calm but clear. "No." That single word silenced the laughter for a heartbeat. Then the cheers came back louder, filled with hunger for blood. Kor slammed his weapons together, a flash of sparks flying into the air. His roar was so loud it seemed to rattle the walls. He pointed one of his glowing blades at the human and shouted, "I will tear you apart before their eyes." The queen leaned back in her throne, satisfied. This was no fight. It was entertainment, humiliation dressed as justice. The human took a deep breath and placed his feet firmly on the sand. The short blade looked useless compared to the alien weapons, yet he held it with both hands as if it carried more weight than steel. Around him, the hot air shimmered. Sweat slid down his back, but his eyes never left his opponent. The crowd began to chant the warrior's name. "Kor! Kor!" The sound was like thunder, shaking the air. Still, the human stood straight, letting the noise wash over him. His heartbeat slowed. His body grew still, like a hunter waiting for the right moment. Kor raised all four of his weapons and lifted them high for the crowd to see. Light shimmered on the blades, and the people screamed in delight, already imagining blood staining the sand. Then, with a sudden crash, Kor slammed his weapons down and charged. The ground shook as he thundered forward, each step shaking loose dust and stone. The human did not move. He watched, waiting, his eyes following every motion. At the last second, when the alien warrior swung down his massive blade, the human slid to the side, the weapon slicing only air. Dust burst upward where it struck. The crowd gasped. Kor turned quickly, swinging again. The human ducked, rolled, and came back to his feet. His blade flashed once, striking lightly across the armor. It left no wound but drew a line of dust. It was enough to show he could touch the untouchable. A murmur spread through the crowd. The queen narrowed her eyes. She leaned forward, gripping the edge of her throne. She had ordered humiliation, but this human was not cowering. He was moving with precision, watching, testing. Each dodge, each small strike was not random. It was study. Kor roared again, angry now. His next strikes were faster, more violent. The human barely escaped, the sand cutting his knees, his blades scraping sparks on the black armor. Sweat dripped from his forehead, but his eyes stayed sharp. Every near-death escape added to the tension. The crowd that once laughed now leaned forward. Some shouted for Kor, others shouted for blood. But a strange silence began to grow between the chants. They had expected fear, begging, quick defeat. Instead, they saw a fragile man refusing to fall. From above, the queen clenched her jaw. She spoke low, her voice carrying only to her advisors. "He should be broken already. Why does he still stand?" No one answered. Below, the human tightened his grip on his blade and took a single step forward. The crowd roared in shock. No human had ever dared to advance on Kor. His chest rose and fell, blood already marking small cuts across his skin, but his feet carried him forward without hesitation. Kor laughed, deep and cruel. "Good, you are brave, little prey. I will enjoy crushing your bones." He spun his weapons in a storm of glowing light, preparing for the kill. The human's lips moved, barely audible, like that's a whisper only to himself. Not today. The arena held its breath, thousands of eyes locked on the sand, on the two figures standing in the sun. One was a monster of war, the other just a man with a blade too small. But for the first time, doubt crept into the crowd's cheers. Perhaps the Queen's order would not go as she planned. Perhaps the arena would witness something they had never seen before. The crowd's roar still shook the stone walls when Kor lifted his weapons high, but the Queen's eyes never left the human. She leaned forward on her throne, her sharp nails drumming the armrest, waiting for the moment he would break. Her champion circled the man like a beast ready to strike, each footstep deliberate, heavy, making the ground tremble. Dust rose with every step, swirling around them as if the arena itself held its breath. The human's chest rose and fell slowly, but his eyes moved fast, tracking every motion of his opponent's armored body. His blade was small, unimpressive, almost laughable compared to the glowing alien weapons, yet the way he held it spoke of control. He was not waving it in fear. He carried it like a tool, waiting for the right place to strike. Kor barked out a laugh that echoed like thunder. "Is this your champion, Queen? A fragile creature that hides behind silence?" His words made the crowd laugh, but the laughter carried a nervous edge. They had seen the human avoid blows that should have ended him in a single strike. They had seen him move with speed sharper than instinct. The Queen raised her chin proudly and called out for all to hear. "This fight is only beginning. Break him, Kor. Show him what it means to defy a queen." The warrior lifted his largest blade, light glowing along its sharp edge, and came forward with terrifying speed. The human twisted to the side, barely escaping, as the weapon cut the air with a sound like tearing metal. The force of the strike shook the ground, sending cracks through the stone. The human stumbled but did not fall. He tightened his grip, wiped blood from a shallow cut on his arm, and steadied himself again. Gasps rolled through the crowd. Kor was not playing. He had meant to end the fight with that strike. Yet the human had slipped away. The warrior snarled, his forearms moving in a deadly blur as he attacked again and again. Sparks exploded as metal clashed against stone, each miss digging scars into the arena floor. The human ducked, rolled, and slid, his blade flashing in the sun. Small scratches appeared on the warrior's armor, light touches, not enough to wound, but enough to prove the human's reach. The noise of the crowd shifted. At first they shouted Kor's name, sure of victory, but now whispers began to spread. Some leaned forward, watching the human with wide eyes. The idea that he could resist even this long was already a crack in their belief. The Queen's lips pressed into a thin line. She had ordered humiliation, a quick reminder of weakness, but instead the human was writing a different story. She snapped her fingers, and the horns blew, filling the air with pressure. "Do not toy with him, Kor," she commanded. "End it!" The warrior obeyed, rage twisting his face. His movements turned faster, harder, his weapons like storms of fire. The human was pushed backward, barely able to dodge, his breath heavy, his blade cut in more places now. Blood marked the sand. Still, his eyes never lost focus. He studied the way the warrior stepped, the weight of his weapons, the gaps in his armor. Every second he survived gave him more understanding. Then came the moment no one expected. The warrior lunged with all his strength, bringing two blades down at once. The human slid low, sand spraying under him, and drove his short blade upward. Metal shrieked as the weapon slipped under a gap in the armor at the warrior's side. It did not kill, but the strike forced a grunt from the champion's chest. For the first time, Kor bled. The arena fell silent. Even the Queen froze, her eyes wide for a heartbeat before narrowing in fury. The human stepped back, breathing hard, his blade stained now with alien blood. He raised it slowly, pointing it at the towering warrior, not with arrogance, but with calm certainty. The silence broke into chaos. Some shouted in shock, others in rage, but all could feel the shift. The fight was no longer one-sided. The Queen's order to humiliate the human had twisted into a dangerous possibility. Her champion might lose. Kor's roar shook the arena as he pressed his wounded side with one hand, fury blazing in his 4 eyes. The cut was shallow, but it carried more weight than 100 victories. It showed he was not untouchable. The human stood opposite him, chest rising and falling, his small blade dripping with the faint shine of alien blood. Dust swirled around them, the silence of the crowd broken only by scattered gasps and whispers. The champion charged again, heavier and faster than before. His weapon spun in the air like a storm of glowing death, each swing powerful enough to shatter stone. The human darted back, his boots sliding across the sand, each breath sharp, each movement just enough to stay alive. Sparks flew when steel clashed against alien metal, and the sound rattled the ears of everyone watching. Kor's rage drove him harder, his strikes crashing like thunder, but rage also clouded him. His swings grew wider, heavier, less precise. The human saw it. He saw the rhythm hidden inside the fury, the fraction of a second where armor slowed the champion's arm, the way his weight dragged him half a step longer than needed. Those small truths became openings, windows only the desperate could see. The crowd's chants turned confused, broken between cries for blood and disbelief at what was happening before their eyes. This human was not just surviving, he was fighting back. His blade flickered again, sliding across a joint in the armor, leaving another mark. It was not deep, but it made Kor stumble for a breath, enough to ignite fresh murmurs through the stands. The queen leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of her throne until her knuckles turned pale. This was not the spectacle she ordered. She had wanted a broken man crawling on the ground, not one carving scars into her champion, yet she could not look away. The human's defiance was more dangerous than she had imagined. Kor bellowed and spun, his blades slicing the air in a deadly circle. The human ducked low, sand spraying against his skin, and rolled beneath the whirling storm. He came up close, inside the warrior's reach, and drove his elbow against the weak spot near the champion's ribs. The armor rang, and Kor staggered back a step, rage twisting into shock for the first time. The noise in the arena shifted again. Where once there was laughter, now there was tension, the audience unsure whether they were watching the rise of a miracle or the beginning of a tragedy. The human's chest was bleeding, his legs trembling from exhaustion, but he refused to fall. He kept pressing forward, each strike of his tiny blade landing with purpose, each movement narrowing the gap between prey and predator. Kor swung wildly, his massive weapon slamming into the ground, sending a crack through the stone floor. Dust exploded upward, blinding both fighters for a moment. Out of the haze, the human burst forward, his blade cutting another line across alien steel. The crowd gasped as Kor roared in pain, stumbling backward into the light. Blood glistened on the sand now, not only human, but alien. The queen's face hardened as realization crept over her court. This was no longer just a fight for entertainment. It was turning into something far more dangerous, a battle that might change how every soul in the arena viewed humans forever. Kor's breathing had turned into a savage growl, each inhale heavy, each exhale burning with fury. The scratches across his armor shone like insults carved into steel, and his pride bled deeper than the wounds on his body. He tightened his grip on his weapons and advanced again, slower now, more deliberate, his eyes never leaving the human who stood bloodied but unbroken. The human shifted his stance, his blade low, his body angled as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. Every bruise, every cut he carried had taught him something. The reach of Kor's arms, the drag of his heavy armor, the fraction of hesitation after every powerful strike. He knew now that the champion's strength was also his weakness. Kor swung with one upper blade, a strike meant to split his opponent in half. The human ducked under it and slid closer, his small blade cutting fast across a joint at the warrior's leg. A spark, a grunt, and for the first time Kor faltered mid-step. The crowd gasped, a wave of disbelief rolling through them like wind through fire. The human did not stop. He pressed forward, his movements sharp and unexpected. His blade darted in quick bursts, striking not for show but for purpose. Small openings, weak spots the alien armor could not fully cover. He was not trying to overpower Kor. He was dismantling him, piece by piece, with patience carved from desperation. The champion roared and lashed out with both lower arms, blades crossing in a deadly arc. The human spun away, sand flying from under his boots, and in the same breath slashed again at the warrior's side. Another mark, another wound. The sound of alien steel bending under the tiny blade shook the silence between shouts. A strange rhythm began to form. Kor's strikes thundered down like storms, but each miss left him slower, each failure heavier. The human, though battered, seemed to grow sharper, his focus narrowing like the edge of his blade. He was no longer merely surviving. He was turning the fight, twisting the impossible into reality before thousands of eyes. The crowd, once certain of the outcome, now stood on their feet. Some shouted for the Queen's champion, but others found themselves shouting for the nameless human, their voices breaking tradition with every cry. The Queen's face hardened, her jaw tight as her nails dug into the throne. She had wanted shame for this man, but shame was creeping toward her own seat instead. Kor, enraged, swung down with all four arms in a crushing strike. The human dove aside, rolling across the sand, and sprang up just as the warrior's weapons slammed into the ground with a sound like a mountain breaking. Cracks spread across the arena floor, dust and stone exploding upward. But when the dust settled, it was the human still standing, blade lifted, eyes burning with quiet fire. And for the first time, the champion's stance wavered. The aura of invincibility that once wrapped him began to crack, just like the ground beneath his feet. The fight was no longer about a queen's order or a man's humiliation. It had become a test of will, and the human was proving he carried more than anyone had dared believe. The silence that followed the last clash felt heavier than the roar of the crowd. Kor stood with his chest heaving, sweat and blood dripping down the seams of his armor, his weapons still glowing, but slower in their movement. The human's body shook from exhaustion, his arms trembling, his clothes torn and stained red, yet his eyes burned with a strange calmness that unsettled everyone who looked upon him. The warrior bared his fangs and charged again, rage making his steps uneven. Each strike thundered down like falling stars, each swing meant to end everything in a single blow. The human staggered back, his boots sliding in the sand, his blade barely catching the force of each strike. His arms ached, his breath tore at his throat, and every moment felt like the edge of death. Yet still he endured. The arena filled with the sound of steel screaming against alien metal, sparks flying in showers that lit the battlefield. The human ducked low, rolled beneath one strike, and answered with a sudden slash that tore a deeper line across the champion's leg. Blood spilled this time, dark and shining, and the crowd erupted with cries of shock. Kor howled, the sound wild and furious, his pride bleeding faster than his wound. He swung again, reckless, desperate to crush this impossible defiance. His strikes grew violent but sloppy, opening gaps wider than before. The human's blade flashed again, quick and sharp, cutting across another joint of armor. The champion stumbled, his balance shaken, and gasps rolled through the stands like a wave. For the first time, the audience began to chant, not one name, but two. Half roared for Kor, desperate to cling to their belief in his invincibility, while others shouted for the human, voices shaking with disbelief at what they were witnessing. The arena had turned into a storm of sound, split between tradition and the rise of something new. The Queen's expression twisted into fury. Her command had been to humiliate, but the scene before her was humiliation of another kind. Her warrior struggling, her people wavering. Her grip on the throne tightened until the golden frame cracked under her hand. The human pressed forward, his steps heavy but unrelenting. His blade struck again, leaving another line, another scar across the black armor. Every cut was a message. Every breath he forced out of his tired lungs was defiance. Kor, wild with shame, raised all four weapons high and brought them crashing down in a storm of light and steel. The human leapt aside, sand exploding beneath him, and in that opening drove his blade upward with all his strength. The sound of tearing metal rang through the arena. Kor staggered back, clutching his side, blood pouring freely now. His eyes widened, his roar broke into a pained cry, and his massive body dropped to one knee. The crowd fell silent, the air thick with disbelief. A single man with a single blade had brought their undefeated champion to the ground. The human stood before him, swaying from exhaustion, bloodied and broken but unyielding. He lifted his blade once more, not in cruelty, but in simple proof that he had survived, that he had done the impossible. The Queen rose to her feet, her voice a whisper at first, but trembling with rage. What she had meant as a spectacle was now a disaster. The warrior lay beaten, and the human still stood. and by the ancient law of their people, the consequences of defeat would not fall on the human, but on her. The arena seemed to freeze as Kor collapsed onto one knee, his weapons clattering against the stone floor. The sound echoed like the fall of a tower, and the silence that followed was deafening. Thousands of alien eyes stared, unable to believe what they had seen. The champion who had never been defeated, the warrior who crushed whole armies, had been brought down by a single wounded human. The man stood with his blade lowered, his body swaying as if the weight of survival pressed harder than the fight itself. Blood dripped from his arms and legs, but his gaze was steady, unshaken. He looked at the broken warrior before him, then at the queen above, his calmness burning like quiet fire against her rage. Kor pounded a fist into the ground, his roar filled with pain and shame. Yet he could not rise. Every attempt only made him stumble further, his strength drained, his pride shattered. The human stepped closer, lifting his blade as if preparing to end it. The crowd inhaled as one, waiting for the strike. But it never came. Instead, the man stopped just short. His blade hovered over the fallen warrior's throat, then slowly lowered. He spared the life that no one else would have spared his. Mercy where vengeance was expected, mercy that cut deeper than any wound. A ripple of shock spread through the arena. Even the queen leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with disbelief. She had wanted humiliation, but it was her own people who now felt humiliated. The human had not only defeated her champion, but also refused to finish him, as if declaring that he did not need blood to prove strength. The ancient laws of her empire stirred in the whispers of the crowd. Everyone knew them, etched deep into their history. When a champion falls, the burden of defeat falls upon the throne itself. The queen clenched her fists, her knuckles pale against the gilded arms of her seat. To ignore the law would brand her weak, but to obey it would chain her to the very man she had sworn to disgrace. Her advisors shifted nervously behind her. Some dared to remind her in hushed voices, "It cannot be denied, Majesty. The human is the victor. The right must be fulfilled." Her lips tightened, her jaw trembling with suppressed fury. "No," she hissed, but the law was older than her reign, older than her bloodline. The crowd was already chanting, voices rising into a storm. "The law, the law, the law." The human stood silent, watching the throne with unreadable eyes. He had not asked for this. He had fought only to survive, yet survival had carried him into the center of an empire's most unbreakable tradition. The queen rose, her cloak flowing behind her like a storm cloud. Every step down toward the arena was filled with venom, but she did not stop. She could not. The eyes of her people cut sharper than any blade, demanding she honor the law. When she reached the floor, she looked upon the human with a gaze that could burn stone. "By the binding of the old ways," she said, her voice trembling between pride and fury, "the punishment of this defeat is mine to bear. You have won what no other should have won." Her words echoed like thunder. The crowd erupted with shouts and disbelief. The human stood tall despite his wounds, his presence calm, while the queen's own dignity shattered before her people. What she had planned as his ruin had become her chains. The punishment was not his shame, but her own, and that punishment was marriage. The declaration struck the arena like lightning, and for a heartbeat, even the wind seemed to stop. The queen's words, spoken through gritted teeth, sealed a fate neither she nor her people could ignore. Marriage to a human, what should have been unthinkable, was now demanded by the very laws that held her throne in place. The crowd's roar rose in waves, some crying out in outrage, others in shock, a few daring even to cheer. The human stood still, his blade lowered, his body trembling from exhaustion, but his spirit unbroken. He had entered the arena as prey, meant to crawl away in shame or die in the sand, but now the empire's queen faced him as his equal in law. Their eyes met across the blood-stained ground, hers burning with hatred and humiliation, his calm, steady, unreadable. The guards, uncertain, looked to her for command. None came. She could not undo her own words without tearing down the foundations of her power. With every second of silence, the truth grew heavier. The human had not only defeated her champion, but bound her future to his. Whispers spread like fire through the stands. The queen must obey. She belongs to him now. A human will stand at her side. The disbelief carried across every voice until it became undeniable reality. The empire had witnessed its most sacred tradition turned against its ruler, and no amount of fury could erase it. Kor, still kneeling and clutching his wounds, lowered his head in shame. His defeat was no longer just his own, it had shifted the course of the throne itself. The human walked past him without cruelty, sparing not just his life but his pride, a gesture that only deepened the weight of the queen's humiliation. The queen's chest rose and fell sharply as she faced her people. Her voice, when it finally came, was cold and sharp as a blade. The law binds me. The law binds us all. He will have what tradition demands. The words left her mouth like poison, but the moment they were spoken, the sentence was sealed. The crowd erupted again, louder than before, their voices mixing with shock, disbelief, and the thrill of witnessing history. The human raised his head, battered but undefeated, his quiet strength speaking louder than triumph. He had not needed crowns, armies, or power to claim victory. He had only needed his will. And now, the queen who once sought to destroy him stood chained by her own empire's oldest law. Her punishment was a bond she despised, a marriage that turned humiliation into a throne shared with the very man she had mocked. The arena, drenched in blood and dust, had transformed into the birthplace of a story that would echo far beyond its walls, of a human who came as nothing, fought with nothing, and left with everything.